Chapter 8. Who Mourns the Mourner? Church bells chimed 8 times from across the graveyard. Letting herself into the Bronte Museum, Porter found Clarice alone in the library, hunched over her laptop. Mr. Clifton was happy for them to make this their hub for their investigation. Porter placed new thermometers on the long table in the middle of the room. She was still getting used to PIU's generous budget and the novelty of not being interrogated about new equipment requests. Danny had never been so accommodating. She had expected Sue to reject her request, but when it was signed off without comment, Porter quickly augmented her wish list. A new laptop and 12 camcorders were confirmation she had hit the jackpot. Porter could live without knowing the donor's identity, providing the money kept flowing her way. And that the benefit of being a wealthy person's diversion was that it annoyed the hell out of the parapsychology department. Porter hoped Mike had let slip about her shiny new toys. She was perverse enough to enjoy promoting discord among his former colleagues. "Where are the spare camcorders?" asked Porter, looking for the blue case. "I left them in the boot. Do you want me to get them?" asked Clarice, who had arrived earlier to meet with Mr. Clifton and start setting up for the night's vigil. "Careful no one sees you," instructed Porter. If someone was planning to break in later, she wanted to give them more than they bargained for. But Clarice thought the dim light they had on would rouse suspicion. Porter told her not to worry. The cleaner's ability for dust removal did not stretch to turning off the lights. The owls of Haworth were well used to seeing the museum aglow, forever a beacon in the gloom. Clarice left, muttering about the environment. At least most of the building was in darkness as she crept to the shop and peeped out of the window. A man was trekking up the hill, dragging a dog. Neither exhibited much enthusiasm for their nightly promenade. Clarice waited for them to pass before stepping outside. Mr. Clifton had asked her to park away from the museum. Neighbours would register unfamiliar vehicles, and he did not want to provoke unnecessary interest. She soon returned with the blue case. Porter tested the camcorders before positioning them around the building, while Clarice checked they were feeding back to her laptop. Porter accepted Luddite's status when it came to her diary, but even she could appreciate being able to monitor a building without the need to leave her chair. Hell, she could do it in bed if she felt so inclined. She was tucking into an oversized bag of Skittles when the temperature suddenly dropped in the dining room. Clarice wasn't the cause. Porter could hear her moving about upstairs. Checking the footage showed the room was still in darkness. She picked up her torch and a spare thermometer and went to investigate. The dining room door was closed. Porter raised her torch, part light, part weapon, before gingerly opening the door. A frigid air escaped. Porter ran a beam of light across the furniture, coming to settle on the thermometer in the middle of the table. It appeared to be working properly. Porter placed the spare next to it and waited. The second thermometer soon mimicked its partner. Porter could rule out faulty equipment. She was considering her next move when the curtain tremoured. It was minor, but worthy of attention. Gripping her torch, Porter waited. Material shivered for a second time as the draft escaped. So, it was the wind picking up rather than a paranormal phenomenon, which was culpable. Porter peered behind the curtain and discovered another of the cleaner's failings. She closed the window. Porter scanned the dining room whilst waiting for the temperature to return to normal. It was simply furnished with a table and chaise longue. The Bronte sisters had done most of their writing in here, although the grate which had once warmed their vivid imaginations was long redundant. She was drawn to the portrait above the mantelpiece. The sitter, while no beauty, displayed an air of subdued serenity. Clarice walked in and Porter bewitched by Charlotte Bronte. "What's wrong?" she whispered tautly, having returned to an empty library. The window was open. Clarice was mortified. She should have noticed when she checked the room. They returned to the library and made themselves comfortable. Dawn felt a long way off. Clarice was plagued by her oversight. "So you're not perfect," said Porter, helping herself to coffee. Clarice shifted uncomfortably. It was her first investigation. She needed it to run smoothly. Porter couldn't recall many investigations running smoothly. "I won't tell Sue and tarnish your reputation." Clarice's expression darkened further. What do we do now? She asked, flicking through the live footage for any signs of activity. We wait. Clarice fidgeted. Porter pointed at her bag of Skittles. You can sort those if you're in need of excitement. Clarice ignored the sweets until Porter tipped a few on the table. Paper cups were quickly deployed. There are nearly 1,500 people buried outside, muttered Clarice, dropping red sweets into a cup. Porter gave her a wry look. Paranormal activity wasn't a given just because they were surrounded by death. Perhaps they're shy, continued Clarice, or too exhausted to haunt after walking up and down Main Street all of their lives, said Porter. Clarice dropped the final sweet in its assigned cup before producing a file. Can you test me? I have an exam on Thursday. Porter was glad those days were behind her. What's it on? Alternative beliefs about the afterlife. Porter flicked through Clarice's notes. The curriculum hadn't altered since she was a student. Why do you think there are so many? She challenged her intern. Clarice frowned. Dr. Willis wasn't interested in her opinion. He just wanted her to regurgitate the facts. You have a view about everything else, encouraged Porter. It's not relevant to the exam, insisted Clarice. Humour me. I need time to think about it, Clarice responded testily. Don't rush, we have all night. Porter handed back the file and returned to her screen. Clarice sulked over her revision. Porter recognised she had her work cut out with her intern. Paranormal research was an unusual career choice for someone with a need to control, and with so few universities teaching the subject, Clarice would have fought hard for her place. The question was why. Porter asked her as much. What do you mean? Asked Clarice, suspicious of being inadvertently tested. And what's driving you to do this? Well, what drives you? Clarice stalled. The mystery, smiled Porter. Clarice hesitated. My family drives me. Meet them, and you'll appreciate why. Porter raised an eyebrow. They're convinced that they see things even though they're just winding each other up. Gran's the biggest culprit. She says her house is haunted by a man called Cedric. It's funny how he conveniently steals her jammy Dodgers, giving her the excuse to buy more. Lots more. Maybe she's telling the truth. Her scales are telling the truth, asserted Clarice, and my parents only say they can see things because they're afraid. Of what? Of being ordinary, like me. Porter studied her intern. You're on a mission to discredit your family. They don't need me for that, Clarice snorted. What was that? It sounded like the winding of a clock. Porter checked her screen. The hall was in darkness, but she thought she detected movement on the stairs. The temperature reading by the grandfather clock had dropped below 0. The winding stopped. Porter reached for her torch. Wait here. But Clarice did not want to be left alone. She tailed Porter to the door. Keep an eye on the readings, said Porter, forcing her to stay put. The clock's revived heartbeat cut through the gloom as Porter stole into the hall. The air was warming up again as she moved towards the stairs, signalling she was alone. Feet ran overhead as Porter re-entered the library. Clarice's eyes shot to the ceiling. I'll check, said Porter, abandoning her intern for a second time. The sound lured her to Mr. Bronte's bedroom, but the door was closed. Porter felt the need to knock before entering. Apart from a few trinkets and memories, though, she was quite alone. The moon bathed the room an olive hue. Patrick Bronte had occupied this chamber following his wife's death. Porter turned to go when the temperature dropped without warning. Her eyes watered in protest. Moments later, and a form appeared in the corner, drawing on her energy to take shape. Porter was suddenly lightheaded. The shadow moved to the window and started to pace. Floorboards creaked in response to the emerging form. Porter found herself staring at an elderly man. His black suit elongated an already thin frame, which bowed at the neck. The apparition was lost in the moment. He directed his murmuring at the floor. Porter's gaze darted to the camera, checking for the green light. She hoped the microphone was capturing his musings. The ghost suddenly stopped pacing and turned to the night. Bramwell! cried. Patrick Bronte no longer judged his son's behaviour. He just wanted him home. The ream started to spin, the wraith demanding more energy than Porter could afford. Springs voiced their objection when she fell against the bed. Porter held her breath, waiting to be found out. The vision considered her a moment before striding past her and out of the room. She shivered uncontrollably. The shadow's proximity bore all the charm of an icy bath. She tried to stand, but her legs refused to obey. The camera recorded Porter's frustration while the revenant ventured down the stairs. Using the wall for support, she pursued it across the wintry landing, a warning that the shadow remained close. The grandfather clock was being wound up again. Porter peered over the banister to see Patrick tending to his beloved clock. She wondered how much confusion it would cause if Mr. Clifton moved it to the library. His task performed, the shadow locked the clock door and inserted the tiny key in his waistcoat before continuing to his study. Porter followed whilst trying to avoid squeaking boards. Shunning conventional methods, Patrick glided through the study door. Porter's breath evaporated as the stairwell warmed again. She was nearing the study when she spied a form in the kitchen. Clarice had seen Porter collapse on the bed and wanted to check she was unharmed. "Who's monitoring the readings?" challenged Porter, dismissing her concern. Clarice melted away. As Porter was yet to master the art of walking through doors, she entered the traditional way. Patrick was sitting by the empty grate with his head in his hands, watched over by a portrait of himself above the mantelpiece. A small lamp in the corner strained to brighten the gloom. Porter lingered by the door. "Pray, child, why must you loiter so? Enter if you have a mind to," the spectre instructed. His tone expected abeyance. Surprise enticed Porter in further. She closed the door but stayed by the exit, a habit she had learnt the hard way. She need not have worried. Patrick only cared for his thoughts. "Oh, the devil has snatched him," he said, rubbing his brow resignedly. Loss was a heavy burden to endure. Porter studied her companion for a second time. Sunken eyes failed to lessen his stern visage, which served as a backdrop for a strong nose and lean mouth. Her gaze lowered to the man's chin. She couldn't help marvel at the shyness of it. A white scarf swaddled it safely from scrutiny, mirroring the Egyptian's love of binding. Porter thought the shadow's attire the very picture of piety. Only his stockings let him down. Mud stained the ankle to pollute an otherwise sterile outfit. Had desperation driven him onto the moor? Patrick struggled to his feet and crossed to the window to pull back the shutters. Village lights danced like fireflies in the darkness. While the ghost's attention was craning beyond the panes, Porter's remained firmly within. A table covered with correspondence took centre stage, with the large magnifying glass employed as a paperweight. Once the property of Reverend Bronte, it was now taking pride of place in the museum's display. Distressed fingers stroked the window, pleading for his son to return. Patrick battled with the impulse to throw it open and yell into the night. He knew it was futile, but that did not stop him from scouring the dark. If he waited a moment longer, prayed a little harder, surely the night would release his son. "Has Tabby retired, child?" Patrick asked Porter's reflection. She nodded. "Then get thee to bed. I shall wait for Bramwell." Porter stood firm. The wraith went back to ignoring her. Resting his head against the cool glass was a tonic for a feverish brow. His wife, his children, his parishioners, all were gone from him now. Even God had forsaken him to the wilds of the moor. He suffered the agony of being alone. For whom mourns the mourner? The lamp flickered back to life as the shadow waned. Porter shifted, willing him to stay. "He will be back presently," the ghost surfaced from his musings, causing the lamp to dim again. "I should not have allowed him to go. But how could I stop him now he's all grown?" "What? You're still up? I told you to go to bed, child." Porter didn't move. The Reverend considered his audience. Why are you so willful, child? You think I have no say in this house because I'm outnumbered? You grow as wild as Emily. I caught her half crazed on the moor this morn, running amok like a sprite possessed. She blamed her mischief on the brook fairies as if I didn't know any better, and the villagers are just as ignorant. They encourage your sister onto the moor, calling her a daughter of nature. I wish you would learn from Charlotte rather than those godless creatures. A crash, then giggling distracted Porter. The smell of almonds pervaded the study, yet Patrick remained oblivious to the din. His head hung low as he continued his lament. Giggling continued. Porter was torn between staying and going to investigate. You never listen, child, the spirit reproached her. I hear children upstairs, said Porter quietly. Children? Is Bramwell back? No, I don't see him. You're mistaken, child. I would hear him come home. Wiping his glasses, the Reverend returned to his seat. Bramwell is as willful as Emily, but tardiness is not one of his faults. You remember his birth took us all by surprise, not least poor Maria. He arrived 3 weeks early. No, child, it is the demon which keeps him away. I am only grateful his mother is not here to witness it. It would break her heart. It breaks my heart. Poor Patrick wiped his eyes. God forgive my despair, child. I no longer have the strength to combat Bramwell's addictions. I watch him dying before me, yet am powerless to his ravings. Lord, if you must steal him, please, not like this. I beseech you. The lamp flickered back to life. Porter found herself quite alone. Something white caught her eye, a feather resting innocently in the grate. Porter retrieved it and went back to the library. Clarence was sitting at the table looking pensive. She remained silent as Porter warmed her hands on the radiator before checking the readings. Cold spots had been recorded in numerous rooms, including the library. She eyed Clarice questioningly. Clarice frowned. She had been too absorbed in watching footage of Porter to register any changes close to hand. The museum was quiet again, allowing Porter time to view her encounter with the Reverend Bronte. The shadow was obscured by low light, but the microphone had recorded a muffled sound interspersed with her responses. Who were you talking to? Asked Clarice. She couldn't see the ghost when she'd been watching it live. She looked at Porter in disbelief and being told, Really? What did he want? Children who behave, responded Porter. The dead were often as pedestrian as the living when it came to their needs. Clarice replayed the footage. Why can't I see anything? Porter appreciated it was difficult to the untrained eye. Watch closely, she instructed, replaying it again. Clarice scrutinised the screen. Why did you stay by the door? In case I needed to make a swift exit. Did you think you were in danger? Clarice sounded nervous. Best to assume the worst, said Porter, her interest monopolised by the ethereal Reverend pacing. Leaning in close, Clarice willed herself to see beyond the obvious. No, still nothing, she sighed. Porter forwarded the footage to when Patrick reclaimed his seat. And now? Clarice saw an empty chair, nothing more. Incompetency versus insanity, derided Porter, magnifying the chair to fill the screen. Is that any better? Clarice screwed up her eyes. No, I can't. Hang on. The seat looks blurry. Is that him? We'll make an investigator of you yet, smiled Porter. She forwarded the footage to moments before the crash. The giggling was clear. Clarice pointed to a fragmented bowl at the end of the table. She had heard the noise in Charlotte's bedroom and with her heart in her mouth had tiptoed upstairs to check. I found this on the floor by the window. Porter went to check Charlotte's room for herself. The display case in the corner now sported a bowl-sized gap, yet the case was locked. She hoped Mr. Clifton's insurance was in date. Footage from Charlotte's room showed the bowl was already airborne when it came into view, thus protecting the culprit's identity. It sailed across the room before disintegrating against the wall. Whoever had thrown it had destruction in mind. Swallowing her frustration, Porter asked if there had been any activity in the shop. No, the Kendal mint cake is safe for now, assured Clarice. Fatigue set in around 2. Porter poured herself more coffee from her well-used thermos to fend off sleep. She was considering Skittles' fix when they heard a scraping sound. It was coming from the shop. Porter and Clarice turned to the screen. Street lamps revealed a figure shuffling around the stands. It hesitated by the counter before stepping from view. Panicked, Clarice reached for her phone. "Don't," whispered Porter, seizing it. "Wait here. Lock the door and don't open it to anyone but me." "Don't leave me." Clarice's plea fell on deaf ears. Porter knew she was taking a risk, but at least she had the advantage. The prowler wouldn't be expecting a welcome party. Slipping silently into the kitchen, she waited for the intruder to give their position away. Footsteps, accompanied by a rustling noise, trundled along the corridor towards the kitchen. Porter ducked behind the table, nearly dropping her torch in her rush to hide. Fortunately, the door creaking smothered her curse. Holding her own breath revealed the wheeziness of the prowler. Porter's fear turned to outrage on finding herself cowering in the corner. She lunged for the light. Porter dazzled them both. Mr. Clifton's terror put prepubescent girls to shame. It was hardly surprising. Porter's appearance, while striking at the best of times, was truly petrifying when wide-eyed and brandishing a weapon. The curator gripped the table, and then his chest. "What are you doing here?" cried Porter, fury blinding her to his plight. "What?" Porter reached out to him as he stumbled against the table. "Clarice!" she hollered. Clarice was currently quivering behind a curtain, a choice of refuge in response to the commotion next door. It took a moment for her to register Porter's plea. She assumed her dead in a pool of blood. Light fell on Porter wrestling a figure when an ashen-faced Clarice begrudgingly opened the door. It did little for her nerves. "Help me!" yelled Porter. They dragged Mr. Clifton into the library. Porter wanted to call an ambulance, but he begged her not to. "You took me by surprise," he panted. "Then you shouldn't prowl around in the dead of night." Porter's response was decidedly chilly. Mr. Clifton had woken up with a thirst. He thought he'd spied someone lurking outside the museum when he went to quench it. "I wanted to check you were both okay. I should have phoned," he added lamely. Clients didn't usually interfere. Porter was inclined to resent it. Mr. Clifton was distracted by live footage of the shop. "Have you put cameras in every room?" "Including the kitchen," said Porter. Mr. Clifton's humiliation was complete. He thought his night couldn't get any worse until he noticed the shattered bowl. "Is it valuable?" asked Porter. "It was." Troubled fingers touched a fragment. "I could have sworn I locked the case. Who would do such a thing?" "I don't know, but the case is still locked," insisted Porter. Mr. Clifton hesitated. "Could a ghost have done it?" "Poltergeist, actually," said Clarice. "They're the type who meddle with things." "Give me the type that don't," said Mr. Clifton, dreading telling the board. "If I arrange the other objects in the case, it might buy me some time." Porter suggested he tell them that the pattern was starting to fade, so he had to have it sent to be conserved. "Your colleagues will be none the wiser." "You make it sound so simple, but you don't know the board. They'll want to know why I didn't consult them first." "Rock or a hard place," shrugged Porter. "I'll take the rock," sighed Mr. Clifton. Porter's suggestion was worth a try. "What have I got to lose?" "Your job," responded Clarice. Mr. Clifton had heard enough. "Do you plan on coming back tonight?" asked Porter, watching him zip up his jacket. He shook his head self-consciously. "I don't know how you managed to stay awake." "Practice, and the prospect of a full English," responded Porter. "I'll see you at 7, Mr. Clifton could take a hint. Porter tracked his departure on the monitor before checking the readings. Clarice stole a couple of hours' sleep while Porter kept vigil. The rest of the night proved uneventful, and she woke up to find Porter packing the equipment away. "Are we finished?" she asked, blurry-eyed. "For now. Come on, I'm starving." Only the milk float greeted them as they made the short stroll to Mr. Clifton's cottage. A cool, damp start. Porter could not fault the villagers for delaying the day. Porter drove back to the shambles to shower and change. She put the feather in her chest for safekeeping before going in search of Etty. Her flatmate was in bed surrounded by croissants and paperwork. Pastries and pyjamas made stock-taking bearable. It was past 11 by the time Porter reached the office. She was glad to find herself alone. She was unpacking the equipment when the bursar phoned asking for Sue. "When would she be back?" the man snapped when Porter failed to locate her. A sleep-deprived Porter didn't care for his tone. "Your guess is as good as mine." "Tell her I called, I need..." Porter responded with the dialing tone. Clarice joined her after lunch. Collapsing at the desk she shared with John, an inch of makeup failed to mask her exhaustion. "I thought you were taking the day off," said Porter. "You need my help," responded Clarice, showing tiredness could not compete with ambition. Good grades would only get her so far. "Have you had any rest?" she asked, jealous of Porter's ability to function on so little sleep. "No time," said Porter, recommending a diet of sugar and caffeine. She placed printouts of the temperature readings from the museum in front of Clarice. The charts revealed sudden drops in temperature throughout the night, with some of the cold spots correlating with Porter's movements around the building. Porter pointed at a cold spot in Charlotte's bedroom, which lasted mere seconds. The temperature dropped when the bowl was thrown. A cold spot occurs in the children's study straight afterwards, which is when I heard giggling. The rooms are next to each other. Clarice studied the graph. She assumed the incidents were connected, but Porter wasn't so sure. Breaking the bowl was a malicious, not funny act. No one giggles when they're that angry. Beryl and Soon joined them, the latter carrying a large box of doughnuts. "I thought you might need a boost after last night," said Sue, offering them round. Porter updated her. "It's a pity you didn't capture who threw it," said Sue, on being shown a photograph of the broken bowl. "What will you do next?" "Use more cameras," said Porter dryly. It was past 4 o'clock when Mike and John walked in. Mike slumped behind his screen, which suited his colleagues. John hovered by Clarice. "Aren't you coming to Dr. Rogers' lecture?" Clarice frowned. "That's tomorrow." "No, he's rearranged it. Didn't you read his email?" Clarice had been too busy to check. "I'll see you later," she told Porter, grabbing her bag and hurrying after John. A grunt escaped Mike's screen. Porter was all for ignoring it, but Beryl had other ideas. "You have something to say?" "Students are a bloody waste of space," spat Mike. "They're not the only ones, no?" needled Beryl. Sue walked in with a letter, banishing Beryl to the post room. Mike was forced to shelve his response. Sue asked to speak to Porter in her office. Not trusting Mike, Porter made a point of locking her computer before leaving. Sue's office was filled with exploding boxes. "I like what you've done with the place," said Porter, salvaging a chair. "Estates promised me shelves a fortnight ago," complained Sue. Porter suggested she ask the donor instead. "Probably should," agreed Sue, sitting at her desk. Look, I wanted to apologise again for Mike's behaviour. He's struggling with some personal issues." Porter scoffed. Matrimonial discord wasn't to blame and she knew it. "I'll speak to him," promised Sue. "Don't waste your breath." Sue sighed. "What do you suggest I do?" "Isn't that obvious?" "I'm not going to fire him. He's a good investigator." "Then you need to raise your standards," thought Porter. "Find me an office. Distance will help." "Oh, if only I could," Sue responded lamely. "I'll bring it up with the donor at our next review." "If I'm still here," said Porter craftily. "Of course you'll be here," said Sue, concealing her panic with false confidence. "Danny can be very persuasive," continued Porter, "and being around Mike doesn't help." But Sue knew Mike would be unbearable if Porter had her own office. "Then maybe Fergus should start searching for my replacement. I bet there are a few investigators working for Professor Lovegrove who would happily take my place." Sue shifted uneasily. Did Porter know about the donor's demand? "Let's not talk about you leaving when you've only just arrived," she forced a smile. "Anyway, we have departmental drinks on Friday. It's about time you meet our neighbours." Porter could think of better ways to murder a Friday evening. I'll check my diary. Clarice already has, and you're free. It starts at 7. Porter would ask Clarice to make a note of it in her diary first before bludgeoning her. A sharp knock preceded Beryl. "Scusi, but I have a message for Porter. I come to tell you Mrs. Hewitt called. She say she do what you ask. You understand, no?" "I understand." Sue eyed her questioningly. "Best not to ask," said Porter, leaving her colleagues frustrated.